section is talking of valuation. But very, very interesting concept has been brought in Companies Act 2013 that says that any property, any stock, any shares, goodwill, it is covering everything. Anything and everything that is related with the issue of shares or securities, there has to be a valuation by registered value. So if a merger is taking place, registered valuer has to value. If it has a delisting taking place, registered value has to. If you are issuing a fresh shares, registered valuer has to. So there are different regulators prescribing different methodologies. So I am just skipping all this. This is actually what is detailed. The same things. And just stopping a second on the discounted cash flow method. If you see discounted cash flow method, there are projections and then there is perpetuity. Usually the perpetuity constitutes a very large number of the total valuation. It can be as much as 80%. So what is important is that when we are stopping at a year, so suppose we have prepared projections for 5 years. You can prepare for 5, 3, 10. Then we must see that the normal growth period we have covered the normal growth period. And when we have stopped and applied the perpetuity, at that time, the growth rate has been stabilized. So this is just which I wanted to mention. This is all that we have already discussed. So I'm skipping everything. Another interesting thing is purchase price allocation. So if we are doing a intangible value, so suppose you have acquired a business, a company A has acquired a company B. Now how to account for it? How much do I give value to the tangible assets and how much do I give value to the intangible value? So when a valuation takes place, then for accounting purposes, a purchase price allocation is generally followed. And what it does is that first it takes over all the assets and liabilities at the transacted value. Then it separately values the intangibles, and if there is still any difference, then it is giving to the goodwill. So intangible valuation, if any, to be separately valued, it is only from an accounting perspective. You can say that I have a brand valuation. Brand valuation is a different thing. But if I am saying overall intangible valuation, then intangible valuation is not something that you do intangible and you add it to the normal business valuation. I am just repeating it. Intangibles is just for the purpose of doing my accounting in the books of account. Now I am coming to the registered valuer section. So if we see registered valuer, there is section 247 of the Companies Act 2013, which has for the first time segregated and bifurcated the valuers into two parts. So till now we were known as valuers. Now we will be known as either a financial valuer or a technical valuer. When we are talking of a business valuation, then it's a financial valuation. When we are talking of a property, immovable property valuation, then that is basically a technical valuation. So how the draft rules, this is all as per the draft rules. The rules have not yet been finalized. But what the draft rule says that a chartered accountant, company secretary, cost accountant is qualified for a financial valuer. A merchant banker is qualified as a financial valuer. There is a requirement of 5 years of experience. The law says that 5 years of continuous experience. And the type of valuation it can do is stock, shares, debentures, securities, largely the business. If we talk of technical valuer, then technical valuer is a member of the Institute of Engineers or the Institute of Architects. There is a lot of debate going on it, whether it should be there. There are lots of valuers who are registered under the Institute of Valuers. They are saying why to create another valuation, lots and lots of discussions. But what the draft rule says is that the financial valuer will be valuing the business, the technical valuer will be valuing the assets, and then there can be so if I am doing a business valuation and I require the help of a technical valuer, I can appoint and then I can do it.
Yes.
Please.
This is pertaining to this technical valuer section. the draft rules under Chapter 17 have been circulated by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in February, and which clearly state that chartered engineers who are in practice for more than 5 years will not be treated as registered valuers under the Companies Act 2013. But these are yet to be finalized, as you said. By when can this be finalized, and what do you feel is going to be the outcome of all this?
Sir, this is the rules which are the final rules in the public domain. And this, what I'm telling you is as per the final update from which is formal. Informally, lots of discussions are going on, whether it should be there, whether it should not be there. To the best of my knowledge, the particular subject is on hold because the Companies Act has been enacted. So there was a hurry to enact the law. The law has already been enacted. And now what is important is actually because there are two important sections which have not been enacted in the Companies Act. So one is the NCLT provisions, because there is a SLP going on against the SLP provision, this provisions. And the second provision is that of this registered value. So I don't think it coming before 4 to 6 months.
Decision comes from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs?
Yes.
They take the final decision?
Yes. So these are the areas, if you have to further issue of shares, if you have to do a compromise or arrangement, there is a winding up, there is a non-cash transactions with directors, there is an exit to minority shareholder, there is a corporate debt restructuring. In all cases, the valuation has to be done by a registered valuer. Now what is interesting here is that there are some kind of rules that have, for the first time in the history of India, that have come from a valuation. So how people were valuing, like you see, like Vandana was just discussing that there are valuers who are just taking the projections and valuing it. That is going to change automatically, because we have seen if there is a stronger law, then it stops such things. If there is no law, then there is all the things keep on happening. So a very, very significant step that the ministry has, despite a lot of opposition, that has come in the act, not in the rule. So section 247 says that the valuer has to exercise due diligence. Now due diligence seems to be a wider word, because whether due diligence means that I have to check that whether this balance sheet is reported, fine, signed, or due diligence is that I have to see that whether, now if I am doing Satyam valuation, how can I check that whether there is fixed deposit, I am seeing there is fixed deposit. I will not, when I am going, I will not write to banker that you give it to me, and so this is a question mark, that what is due diligence? How, because valuations are basically dependent on the data that is given by the, so data is given by the company, the due care is taken by the valuer, industry verification is there, different benchmarks are applied. If we feel that the value, the cash flows are high, we can keep a higher discount rate and all that things can be done. But how can we authenticate that the figures that we have got, those figures are correct? So this is a question, and let me tell you, very, very grave charges are imposed on the valuers. If the valuer is not doing valuation properly, he has to refund the money, he has to, he can just, his name can be struck. So these rules are very, very stringent, and we expect to see some quality valuations coming in down the line. How much time? No. The next speaker is here. So I'll take 5 minutes, and I'll ask for, we'll take FAQs for five minutes. I'm just covering some of the tricky issues. First thing is discounts. So first of all, we have to understand that why these discounts and premiums come into play. There is a particular method which is resulting in a particular value. So suppose there is a CCM method. CCM method results in a minority value. Now I have to do minority value, but I have applied discounted cash flow. I have to do minority value, but I have applied comparable transaction multiple. So if we use a different method than what we ought to have used, then there is a inconsistency in the valuation, and there is a need of discounts. Now discounts are of two types. First discount is an entity level discount, and second discount is a shareholder level discount. So when we are valuing a so at times we are asked to value a company, at times we are asked to value a shareholder. So 2% shareholding is a minority or control. If we have to value a 2% shareholding, there is 100% shareholding. If we have to value a 2% shareholding, which method we should use? Should it be a minority valuation or should it be a control valuation? Like? So that in valuation, what we have to look at is not a formula. I got an answer that the valuation is not a arithmetic, it is not a science. Valuation is as good as the logic that we place in the valuation report. So all of us can get a different valuation number, but if all of us can substantiate, then all our valuations are correct. If a person is having 49% shares, like sir has already clarified, so 2% is not a minority, 2% is a control. So 2% wherever it might be, it can be like the possible election results, that a person can go anywhere and it can get any seats. But the important thing is, when we are valuing an entity, then we have to see the key person, contingent liability, holding. So there is a company, if you are doing business in a company directly, there is a different value. If you are doing business in a subsidiary company, and I am a holding company, so we are valuing a holding company, but the business lies in the subsidiary company. There is a different value because there is a holding company discount. There is a company which is having 4 businesses, sugar, power, different. If we do a sum of the part valuation, then the sum of the part valuation will not be, I mean, if we do sugar valuation, power valuation, pharma valuation, 10, the value of the company most likely will not be 30. It will be way below that. It is most likely to be 18, 20. Because when there are different businesses, then there is a diversified discount. If the businesses are such that they are adding value to each other, maybe there is no discount. But if there is a diversified businesses in one company, most likely there will be a discount. And that is why most of the demergers happen. You see, whenever demergers have happened, a spin-off has happened, it has resulted in a value creation. And the logic to that is that all the different businesses are, after the demerger, being run under a separate entity, and there is a proper control, proper focus of the management to that business. When we are valuing at a shareholder level, then we have to see that whether the shareholder is having control. And control is not a normal thing. For a control, we have to see a person might be having 0.1% share. But there might be a veto power that the shareholder has pursuant to a share purchase agreement. So at times, a shareholding matters. At times, the power to control the board matters. But at times, the shareholder agreements give a different insight that what should be the. So my only submission here is that don't go into the numbers, go into the legal documents, go into the internal things, go into the industry, and once we do a total holistic thing, then a valuation can be true and fair. Why premium? I mentioned that the price of shares, those are running in the stock market, is minority. But you see, whenever the acquisition of any company takes place, it does not take place at the particular running price. It takes place at a 30, 40, 50% premium. Because of that, because the market price is minority and the transaction price is control. So that is how the thing goes. Excess cash and non-operating, I have already mentioned that we have to separately add to the normal business valuation, the excess cash and non-operating asset. But again, there can be a scenario wherein we are running an business on a very expensive asset. So that asset is not a surplus asset, but that asset is not resulting in adequate cash inflows. So what we can do is that the only solution, because when you will go to the investor will give you, mostly the investors give valuation on the basis of cash flows. So if the business will not yield cash flows, then the only option to that is restructuring. So you have to sell off that asset, you have to buy a cheaper asset, but these are the challenges that we see from a transaction perspective. When a M&A is taking place, then these kind of challenges. So valuation is not a number crunching. Valuation plays a big role in a transaction structure and advisory. If there are cross holdings, how to value it? So some people, what they are doing, I am having a holding company, there are subsidiaries companies, I have to value a holding company. So they say that we receive the dividend from the subsidiary companies, we add those and we value. But the correct picture is that you should separately value each of the separate entities. You should see whether there is a need of a holding company discount, and then the final number has to come. Accounting practice is very important. When we compare the comparable companies, then suppose there is a company which is paying a minimum alternative tax, 20% tax I am paying, and I consider a comparable company which is paying a 30% tax. So there is a need of adjustment. How accounting is taking place, how tax is taking place is very important. There is a company which is a loss-making company. You can say it is having no value, but you see the loss-making company gets a profit-making company, and the profit-making company was searching for a company which can set off the losses. So there is a value. So value lies in who is the buyer. Standalone, it cannot be a value, but it can give to a different results from who is looking at the transaction. Now this is the last slide that I am concluding, and the slide is saying that which are the methodologies, what the value results, and where it is useful. So if we are using net asset value, book value method, then generally it results in a minority value, and net asset value is always will always lead to the equity value. If we are doing a net asset value, intrinsic value method, fair value method, then the valuation is most likely to be a control value. But again, the result of net asset value is always equity value. If we are valuing comparable companies multiple, then there are certain multiples which result in equity value. There are certain multiples which result in enterprise value. But by concept, the comparable companies multiple method results in a minority value. So if we go from a PE, price earning ratio, or we go from a book value perspective, then it's a equity value. If we go from a EV/EBITDA multiple, if we go from a earning before interest and tax level, then it results in a enterprise value. In case of comparable transaction multiples method, the same concept applies. As to the ratios, I mean the PE or EBITDA, the ratios are same. The only difference is comparable transaction generally results in a control value. And lastly, when we are applying discounted cash flow, then discounted cash flow always apply control value. But discounted cash flow can also be done in two manners. So there can be a discounted cash flow to firm, and there can be a discounted cash flow to equity. So whichever ways we are doing, the same way it is going. So I think I am concluding my session here, and I would be happy to take any of your queries. Yeah. Thank you. 4% of cash. Suppose there is a business which requires 4% cash of the sales, and your company is having 20% of cash. You take an example, you have just sold an asset. When you have just sold an asset, you have got money. You have not deployed that money in any of the business. So that's a surplus cash. It happened in case of Infosys. And if you see the balance sheets of substantial companies today, then almost all companies are having the surplus cash. The reason is that they are not finding an adequate opportunity for acquisition. But again, I am saying, listed companies don't get valuation of the surplus cash. But fundamentally, if you say, then there is a value. If you have to dispose, if you have to sell off, suppose a transaction is taking place today, then what will happen? You will take back your cash and you will say, take the business. But when a company is a listed company, the price is a running price. It is not a selling price. It is a running and minority price. So listed company does not factor in. If you have to do an independent valuation, you will add on. Either you will add on or you will take it and then you will give it to the business value. It covers that you can use either income or asset or market, and all the methods that I just mentioned, it has mentioned all the methods. It is not saying you use A method or B method. It is saying you use any of these methods. So the rules are very liberal and you can use any of those methods. I mean, the challenge there is if a person is not knowing which method to use, then that's a tricky issue.
Can we use the land and building method also?
Sir, land and building method for valuing land and building?
Assets.
Yes, yes, why not?
And replacement cost method for plant and equipment?
Yes, yes.
Are there any specific regulatory provisions with respect to outbound transactions?
Yes, so what the RBI law says is that if you are making investment outside India, then if the transaction price is more than $5 million, then you have to take a valuation of a merchant banker. Otherwise, you have to take a valuation of a chartered accountant or a CPA outside India. So, which method to use is not prescribed. But because the inbound guidelines prescribed for discounted cash flow methods, so people were generally using discounted cash flow. Even for outbound, but that is not technically correct because discounted cash flow is not the minority valuation method. So, to my view, we should use discounted cash flow for majority, 30-40% if you are acquiring. If you are acquiring 3%, 4%, use a comparable companies method. That is easy.
One of the things you said that if a company has 4 businesses, in totality the valuation is discounted. But isn't it exactly the other way? Because if the company has 4 businesses, it has diversified, it has risks are distributed. If one of the business goes down, the other 3 businesses are there to cover. So why is there a discounting in that case instead of having a plus?
What happens if the balance sheet is one? If you see the laws of the country, then when you prepare a balance sheet, you don't prepare a segment-wise balance sheet. You give a segment-wise reporting, but you give it only till the EBITDA level. You can't tell me that this much net profits is there. So what happens? In the last 4 years, what has happened? Every company took debt in 2007-8. They were expanding and there were lots of CDR and distress cases. So I, as an investor, I would like to understand how much debt you have deployed in this business. What is the net profit of this business? From a segment reporting, you can't get.
Segment reporting accounting standard is very clear, and once you give that, it gives the part of the till profit. Apart from that, it gives the loan, etc. where utilized major amounts are always given in.
But if you see the segment reporting, then only EBITDA, till EBITDA people are giving. People are not giving till PAT level. The reporting is, so there are 2 things. One, because I'm a chartered accountant, so I'm telling from a technical perspective. But otherwise, you see, every person would like to understand. So there are 2-3 things. One, that if I am doing 3 businesses, then which business is my focus business? It is not clear. I can be earning from one business, I can be deploying it into another business. I can be having a profitable business, I can be having a loss-making business. So the point is, it makes sense for companies to do different businesses in different companies, because from an investor perspective, if you are interested in business A, you would not like to take the assets, liabilities, loan liabilities of the business B. Secondly, it is very clear, I have earned 100, I have got 10 rupees. In case of a diversified business, when the risk and rewards of different businesses are different. I am giving you an example. There is a company which is into lighting business, and that is also into steel business. The lighting business, that's a live case. The lighting business peers, you compare with Havells, you compare with Sylvania, you compare, they are getting 19 to 20 PE multiple. If you compare with steel, then the company, compare with JSW and all those companies are getting a 9 to 10 multiple. That company is only getting a 5 multiple. Why? Because there is a question mark in the market that what will happen. I mean, there can be a lot of siphoning of money. There can be a lot of structured transactions that happen, and investors don't get a clear picture. In all the cases, if you go through demergers, 80% of the transactions would have created a value after the spin-off. You take Reliance is a landmark case. The value that Reliance is having today and the value that, so it has grown by 4 times, I think.
Principally, it should have been different because once you are valuing one business, you are valuing other business, you are independently valuing a business which takes care of all the risks and perspectives of all the business.
Sir, that is what I'm saying. So what you do, you value A, you do value B, and you do the sum of the part valuation, right? But when all the businesses into one, you cannot do valuation on that basis, because there can be a business which is a profit making business, there can be a business which is a loss making.